In this case study, the car was towed into the shop, and the customer's complaint is that the car doesn't crank. The car doesn't start, it doesn't crank, but they do hear a click when they turn the key to the start position. Hearing this click gives us a lot of information. It gives us either that we're hearing the relay click, or we're hearing the starter solenoid click. It would be much louder if it was the starter solenoid. So here it would help if you were testing this on the car to have a helper turn the key. You could look under the hood and just decide if the little click you're hearing, if it's a small click, is it coming from the fuse box where the relay is located, or is it coming from the starter solenoid itself? Because if it's coming from the starter solenoid and you're getting a click, then more than likely your job is going to be relatively easy here to diagnose this. Because to get a click at the starter solenoid, it means you're getting 12 volts down here. And if you have 12 volts here and you have 12 volts here, and these grounds are good, then your problem would be the starter. But if the click you're hearing is coming from the fuse box and it's just the relay click and you're not hearing anything down at the starter, then that just means that the coil circuit of the relay activated and pulled the switch over. It doesn't necessarily mean that the switch contacts are good inside the relay. You could still have a bad relay, but it does mean that this circuit here had to work. And in order for that circuit to work, the ignition switch monitoring circuit or information circuit also had to work. So the more you understand, the more easily and more quickly you can eliminate the different circuits of this car that make up the schematic. So in this case, we're eliminating 2 right off the bat, 2 of the 4. And then we just need to make a test somewhere along this path down here and see if we're getting power to the S terminal. Now, if it's easy enough to access the S terminal of the starter, I would put my voltmeter right here from here to ground and crank the car and read the voltage. If I'm getting 12 volts at the S terminal and the relay clicked, that means that this circuit all the way up to this point is good. And then I would just need to put my meter here to make sure that I'm getting 12 volts at the battery terminal while I'm cranking. And here's an important point. If you just put the meter on the battery terminal, the red lead to the B terminal and your ground lead of the meter to either negative battery or a good ground, if you don't do it while you're cranking, you don't get to simulate a potential high resistance issue, because high resistance is only apparent when the circuit is on and active. So you might have a situation where you have a bad positive cable that goes from the battery down to the starter, and if you put your voltmeter at the B terminal and did a voltage at measurement, you might measure 12, but then when you're cranking the vehicle, you might measure 3 volts because there's resistance in the cable. The problem would be the battery cable itself, and you wouldn't be blaming the starter. But if you did the test without cranking the car, then it would lead you to a misdiagnosis because you would think you had 12 volts here and you had 12 volts here. So it's very important to make sure that when you're doing these tests that the circuit's on, because then you can not only know if there's an open in the path to that particular point, you'll know if there's a high resistance issue as well. So in this example, if we did measure 12 volts at the S terminal and 12 volts at the B terminal while we were cranking, then the problem would be the starter itself. What if it was a bad relay where the switch contacts were not completing the path? In that case, we would have the same condition where the customer complained that they heard a click, and in this case we noticed that we heard the click coming from the fuse box and no click down at the starter. We would need to measure the voltage at this relay. We could remove the relay and measure the voltage at this terminal, and if there was voltage there while the relay's out, we could use a fused jumper wire, and it would need to be a pretty strong jumper wire here because this is a 40 amp circuit. But we could use a jumper wire with the relay removed, bypass this switch, and just put the jumper from here to here. And remember, it has to be a fused jumper wire. And if the starter then cranked, then we would know that this relay was bad. So the number of tests that you have to do, if you listen and understand the picture and hear a click and know how to evaluate it, the amount of tests that you need to make is very small because you can eliminate a large amount of the schematic without doing that much work. In the next video, we'll do another fault where when they turn the key to the start position, we don't hear anything.